Okay, so first of all, I just wanted to go over my research statement with you both. I know I've explained to you a little bit about what the paper goes over, but this is just so you have more information. So in the research paper, I review literature related to smuggled migrants. So that is people who have been smuggled across the border. And then I talk about how if those migrants settle into a new nation, their experience with politics and with mental health creates a very unique, undocumented experience, like if they successfully reside in that area. Like not compared to like refugees or people who have attained asylum, because there's no form of documentation involved. And I do use DACA as a case study to like kind of examine that. And I'm focusing on undocumented Mexicans. So that is why both of you are here. Privacy disclosure, I will email you both something that you can sign, and that's just going over the fact that the only people who will listen to this or like have this information is myself and the professor. That's it. Like it won't be published anywhere, blah, 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 blah. Yeah, that's pretty much it. Do you guys have any questions before I go into it? I will say that if you don't feel comfortable answering a specific question, you don't have to. Like, I'm perfectly fine with that, and I want, like, both of you to be as comfortable as possible, and I know that some of these things are really hard to talk about, so, like, I don't want to force you to talk about them, just, like, talk about things as much as you can. Like, I don't want you to, like, force yourself to, like, have to, like, do something or a drink. So that's just a little disclaimer. And we can, like, pause at any moment. Like, if you just want, like, a quick little water break or just, like, a breather, like, again, that's fine with me, too. And because we are doing the interview together, so I will ask a question, and, like, either one of you can start whenever, like, you know, just like look at each other. You don't have to like raise your hand or anything. It's not that formal. It's more like a conversation, especially now that you're both here, because you can kind of like talk to each other, like build off of what you're saying, and, you know, like relate to each other's experiences. It's more just like a space for you guys to talk about these experiences, and like don't see me as someone that is going to be like writing down what you're saying, or like I'm not looking for specific answers. I'm just looking for your authentic, like true narratives and experiences. Does that sound good?
Yep.
Okay, so the first one is just tell me a little bit about yourself. So when you first introduce yourself, like do start off with your name, just so that I can have like that on the recording. So whoever wants to go.
Yeah, so you just want our name? And...
Yeah, just like what are you studying, who are you, how old are you, just like some little facts about yourself.
Okay. So I'm Nayla, and I am 22 years old, and I am studying marketing and business administration.
My name is Fatima. I'm 20 years old, and I'm majoring in political science.
Where were you born?
I was born in Veracruz, in a little town called, well, I wasn't born in the little town, which is Omelca, but I was born like in a different city, kind of like saying Woodburn is Omelca and Salem is like where I was born, which is Cordoba. So yeah, it's like close to where my parents lived.
I was born in Michoacan, Mexico, in the city of Apatzingan. It's a really, it's a city kind of compared to Salem. That's like where most of the hospitals are. But for most of like my time that I lived in Mexico, we lived in Aguililla, which is a very rural, small town.
And how long did you both live in those areas?
I was there until I was, I think 3. I think we, like a month before I turned 3, we moved over here.
I think I lived there until I was 4, and I think right when I turned 4 years old, that's when we crossed over.
Do you remember what it was like living there? Like, are there any memories that you can like attach to those places? I know you were really young, so you probably don't remember much.
I have like, sometimes I have memories that just come to me, but a lot of it is kind of a blur, and sometimes it's hard to like depict like what's a memory and what's a dream sometimes, because sometimes I'm like, did I just dream that, or was that real? Unless it's like stuff that my mom tells me about. But I do have some. I think I have visuals of what, even though I don't have that memory, like visually, I have like my like version of the visual of the memory. But
Yeah.
I still have the memory. I just like see it in a probably different way than
Yeah.
what it really was. But yeah, it was hard. It's kind of hard to like have those memories and like know the difference. 'Cause
Yeah.
it's kind of a blur.
It's the same for me, especially like when my mom talks about it, when she's like sharing stories, like I myself like imagine myself being there, and like sometimes there's like a few like flashbacks or like a few like vivid memories of it, and I was like, oh yes, like I have an idea in my head, but again, like I'm not necessarily sure if that's really what it looks like. I don't remember. I do remember like feelings, and smells and things like that, and how I felt.
Just the visuals are harder to put together.
Just the visuals are really hard. Yeah.
And I know you said that you get those at like random moments. Like, what does that make you feel like? Is it hard for you to have those like random like flashbacks just pop up? Like, how do you like deal with that?
I think I think about it mostly when I have conversations about it with my parents, or when I'm like telling someone about it, or just like when I feel like I want to go back to that memory.
Yeah.
But yeah, most of it I think has been positive, because it's like when I have conversations with my parents about it, or like when they're telling me like about things in Mexico, and like I have my like own, even though I don't know what my town looks like, I have like my vision of it. So it's like I go back to that whenever we talk about it. So it's like they're positive things, which is good, because
I think for me they're also very positive. It's never, sometimes when she does describe like certain circumstances, kind of like where we were living and like the situation that we were in, or the poverty that we were facing, sometimes when she talks about it, she always like expresses like a very like, she has like a very like negative connotation attached to it, but it's always like when she's describing it, it's like her homeland, it's like su tierra, like where she calls home, and so it's always like this very special place for her. And so like I've kind of, even though like I wasn't necessarily like raised there, like it's that attachment that I have because she kind of passed it down to me.
Did your parents or family members or guardians ever tell you were going to be migrating to a new place before you did migrate into the United States? Like, do you remember having any conversations regarding that?
I think I did, actually. I kind of do remember, and my mom does tell me about it like now more, but I do remember like she wouldn't exactly say, oh, we're like crossing the border and like doing all these dangerous things. Like she would put it in like, oh, we're gonna go see your dad finally, or like we're gonna go live there, and like you're gonna do all these things. And it's always like they motivated you by telling you about the pretty things about being here, like, oh, we're gonna go to Disneyland and we're gonna do all these things. So that, I think that was like the biggest way of her that like I understood us migrating as just like moving, not really the dangerous parts about it.
I think it was the same for me as well. My dad had already been here in the States, so he had already like found a job, and so my mom was like, vamos a ir a mirar a tu papi, like necesito que like estés fuerte porque mañana va a ser un día muy especial y vamos a ir a ver a papá. And as a child, like I was always like very attached to my dad, and so like that really excited me. Like I was like our family was finally gonna be together, and so I carried that hope, because like I have like a vivid memory of when this was happening, like when we were put in a car with like these like ladies, and they were technically the coyotes, and we were like in the car. But I also remember this because my sister, she has a mental disability. She's the eldest, but for her in that situation, she didn't know how to cope with her feelings, just like the stress of having to be separated from my mom, and like you're being put like in a car where you don't know anyone, and she was just panicking. And I just remember like sitting there in that car, and it was just like this feelings that I was like trying to understand, and it was like, and all I could remember was like, oh, we're gonna go see dad, I'm gonna go see my dad, like we're gonna be okay, and like trying to like it's okay, like don't cry, Ariana, like we're gonna go see dad, like it was just that like that false hope in a way, like you're trying to like convince yourself that everything's gonna be okay, and just like remembering like what I didn't really necessarily understand, like the risk or sacrifice or like the whole complexity of the situation, but just like the unification of my family. I think that's what really like kept me together.
Yeah. And I know you both said that your dads were already in the United States. Did you have any other family members or relatives that were like expecting you to arrive on the other side, or that were already settled there, living there?
Yeah, I did. My dad lived here already. He was on and off from like the time even before I was born. Like he would come and go back and so forth. And I had uncles here from my mom's side, and then I had a cousin who was actually crossing with us that helped out a lot with my mom. So it was my mom, me, and my cousin who was like 18 at the time. So, but yeah, I did have quite a few family members here already.
I know that my aunt on the side of my mom's side, she was already here in Oregon specifically, but we were coming over to California, and my grandpa lived here because he had citizenship. He had acquired it already, and so he was there, and that was going to be like our first point of contact. My dad also lived in California, and yeah, so that we had like a good like connection already.
How did you both migrate into the United States? So like I know you said that you did it through car, so kind of just like explain like the transportation that was used, like what method you used to be able to do it, just kind of a little bit about that.
I remember we did transportation through cars too, but we also did a lot of walking, crossing like railroad tracks and a lot of that stuff. I feel like just transportation through cars and walking was like the most that we did.
Yeah.
For me, like it was a vehicle that we used. Like we were put like in the back seat with like two ladies in front, and we technically were like trying to pass through border security with like they showed the birth certificate of other children, so we were like trying to like, I don't know how to describe it, like you're trying to like be te estás haciendo like pasar como otros niños. Yeah. And so we were like, I don't remember, but like my mom tells me that like they didn't ask for like any photo identification. It was just the birth certificate, so it was really easy for people to do it that way. For my other siblings, my brother and my younger sister, they went in a plane, and so they were with another family, same deal, like different like birth certificates of other children with citizenship status, dual citizenship, and so they were able to go in the airplane. But my mom, for her, like she did walking mostly and like transportation via vehicle, and she also went through an underground like sewage, because that's like the way that you were trying, like, you know, you're trying to be not seen as you were trying to navigate.
And that was very common at that time actually, where kids would, even up to like the maybe like late 2000s or like early 2000s, people still did that, and then they got really strict with border patrol. But I remember that was like common. It's like I didn't do that. I like physically had to go with my mom to cross, which I think was like, I'm lucky that like other kids were able to do that because it was a safer way. But at the same time, like when you didn't have that opportunity, you had to cross with like coyotes and other like people, adults that would just like go in groups.
So compared to not having had your mother like also be in that car with you, like what are your most vivid like memories of that? Like I know you said feelings were a really strong part of when you think about it. Like are there any specific feelings that you remember having?
It was just like the fear that I was never going to see her again, because she had to go with another group, because she had like a fake ID of another woman, and she was supposed to be like trying to, when they were going to get to the frontera, like she was supposed to be that person, but then like immediately they saw her and they're like, this is not you, like, and like that's when they detained her. And it was just when I was going through like the crossing of the border itself, like I was mostly focused on like what was ahead, but the fear that like we were never gonna be together, and like that's what made me like stay hopeful, like that one day like we would all be together. But even after we were able to cross over, my mom still had issues, and like it was like I think like 2 solid weeks that we had no idea, we had no communication with her, we had no idea what happened to the group, and because they had been detained, and so my dad was like trying to call the Coyote, like what's going on, like where is she, like I need you to like give me something, and like he's like, oh, we had some issues come up, we're trying to like wait until she's released and then we're gonna go a different route. He's like, but it was just like really, really complicated, and I remember just like staying up really late sometimes at nights, just like hoping to see like when she would be arriving. And like in the house, like once we were already over, like once we already crossed through Phoenix, we were in this house where like other immigrant families were also there, and it was kind of like a temporary housing situation. And so you would wait there, and like I would see like all these families come and just leave, and you know, new families would come, but like my mom would never, like it was just like the longest waiting period ever. And it's just like I would like watch all the cars, just like thinking like, oh maybe she'll get here, or maybe that's gonna be her, and you just never knew, you know. It was just like this like like something wasn't complete, and like it was like empty, and like you were missing something. So I just it was just like that feeling of emptiness and uncertainty that I was specifically feeling.
Was anyone on your side detained when crossing over, or did you all make it like safely across?
I don't remember anyone being detained. I for the most part, I remember like everyone in the group stayed together. There were parts where we would switch groups. Like we went with different groups for a while. We started with the one that we started with wasn't the one that we ended with. So I don't really know like with those that we ended up leaving behind, like what happened. But as we like moved to different ones, I think it made it easier and less risky because they started to be smaller and smaller, and then like we eventually made it together. But not that I remember. And luckily I had my mom and my cousin with me, and like they never really made us go like separate ways or leave me alone without her. So that was, luckily I like didn't have to go through that. But yeah.
And so what was the first city that you entered, like for the first time when you were like already across the border?
I honestly don't remember.
Do you remember the state that it was?
I want to say it was somewhere in Texas.
Okay.
But I don't remember exactly. But I'm pretty sure it was somewhere still in the desert area because I think we ended up like in a small apartment where we had to sleep at one point. Like people, like a 1-bedroom apartment where people would sleep on the ground. Like even like in the bathroom area, people would sleep because we were just so crowded. But and then after that we had to cross like the desert area. So I feel like it was somewhere near that.
And there's so many like different like entrances. I feel
What was your life like when you first crossed the border into the U.S.? So when you finally found the first place that you were actually permanently settled in, or settled in for longer than like, let's say like 5 months?
So after like I think it was about a month waiting period that we had no idea what my mom was like, where she was, she met us there in the house in Arizona, and then we traveled up to California, and we had a house that my dad had been renting, and so that was like our first like permanent home. And my grandpa, he lived close by too. My dad was able to get a job. He was working as a chef in a restaurant, and so he had a stable income. And then my mom, she struggled at first to find a job, but she finally found one in Sears, cleaning. She was like washing toilets and things like that, and that was like our first permanent home. But the living situation, it was very abusive. My dad, he was just the pressure of trying to, sustain the family. He took on drinking, and it was like every night he would come home drunk. And my mom would, she knew no English. She didn't know anyone. We had my grandpa, which was good, but it was a really, like, tough time trying to adjust. And she was still, like, really afraid of, like, going out places, like, sola, like, she was afraid that someone was going to stop her on the street. She didn't have a license, of course. It took her a really long time to find that job, but we didn't have, like, a car or anything, so we just used, like, transit and things like that. And so my mom was always, like, the one in charge of, like, getting us to our doctor's appointments, taking us to school. And I remember, like, my first elementary school in California, and it was so, like, weird. Like, I was, like, trying to learn English, and then I remember me and my little sister, we were, like, barely watching Sesame Street, and so we were like, okay, like, we gotta learn it so we can talk to the kids at school, and, like, we wanted to make friends. So it was, like, this whole, like, new other world that you were trying to build. And it feels like such a long time ago. Yeah, so that we only lived there, I think, for, like, about 5 months, and then we moved to another place. Yeah.
It's funny, I watched Sesame Street too.
Yeah.
Like, just watching these shows was, like, how you learned.
Yeah.
It's funny. But, yeah, for us, my dad and uncles were already living here in Oregon, so, like, in Salem, actually. So that's where, like, I've been since I got here. We, like, once we were in the U.S., we immediately went to, like, the apartment that they lived in. It was, like, right in front of Walmart, like, where, I don't even know, like, kind of like before McKay Park. It was like a weird, like, next to Pizza Hut. Yeah.
Yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about, that neighborhood.
And there was, like, back then there was, like, a little golf area that I always, like, didn't know it was a golf, like, a mini golf area, but I thought it was, like, a little amusement park, and, like, I don't know, for the longest time I thought it was an amusement park, and it was a freaking mini golf area. But yeah, we went there directly, and then my dad lived with my uncles, so we had a pretty small apartment, but we were there for a while. That was actually our permanent home for I feel like maybe like a year or a year and a half. And then my parents were good. My mom didn't have a job immediately too. Like, her and I spent most of the time alone while my dad and uncles went to work. And she kind of just took care of the house and us and everyone. And I didn't think she would, but eventually she did find a job, and for most of the time that I was young, my parents worked in the fields, so that was, like, their main jobs for a long time. But yeah, like, I remember too, like, before I even started school, we would just walk around, and, like, she was just so afraid to, like, even go to Walmart, like, across the street, and, like, we'd walk to the only, like, little Mexican stores where Chuck E. Cheese is, and, like, I remember that's how we would spend our days, just walking there and back, because that's the only place we really knew. And yeah, it was, I think for us, I don't really know my mom's experience, but I think we started out really good, thankfully, because my dad and my uncles were already there, and they knew everything. They knew, like, they were comfortable enough to, like, get around the areas, and, like, they were used to, like, living with the fear, but also, like, having to be, like, brave enough to, like, go out, and because we needed to go get groceries, like, we needed to go do things. So I think that helped a lot. But yeah, I think luckily we managed to get through, like, the first year, and so, and then that apartment actually, like, burned when we weren't there, because, well, it was, like, an accident from one of us, or I think my grandpa lived with us for a while, and somehow, like, he left the frijoles on.
Oh my god.
And it burned down. Well, it didn't, like, burn down, but it burned the apartment, and we weren't home, so after that we kind of lived, like, around with some of my aunts, and then I started elementary school, and then, like, eventually we found our place, but that was probably, like, the first big thing that happened that wasn't, like, pleasing, but I think luckily we settled in pretty good, and even though my mom was new to everything, my family was there to support us, so
when you both first went into elementary school, and all these kids, like, they knew English and stuff like that, besides the language, in what other ways if you did, like, did you feel different to those other kids, like, going to school with them? Or did you not feel different? Like, did you have a conscience that, like, you were different, like, being in the school system, like, in elementary school?
I don't think I ever necessarily felt like, oh, I didn't belong or something set me apart, because I don't think I understood back then.
Yeah.
My teachers, all of them, were super welcoming. I remember my first kindergarten teacher. Her name was Miss Apple, and it was in Auburn, or Miss Abel, not Miss Apple, Miss Abel. And she just, like, I made a really, like, good connection with her. She knew my mom, and at this point we had left California. We were living with my aunt now because my dad, like, the physical abuse continued, and so my mom, after he almost, like, beat her, like, it's very severely, she's like, I need to get out. And so my aunt, like, we were staying in her house in Salem, and I was going to elementary school there, and my mom, like, she was, like, struggling economically, and she didn't know, like, how am I supposed to sustain all my girls, and, like, I need extra support. And so it was through the school system that she found, like, different, like, resources. And so, like, my teacher, she would always, like, check on me, like, after school, like, how are things at home, like, how are you doing, are you eating? Because, like, that was something that we always struggled with, like, having food. And my mom we couldn't apply for, like, food stamps at that point at all. I think we had WEEK, or that's what it was called, like, it was like like a welfare food stamps program that they had back then in Salem specifically. And so we were able to get that through the school system. And so, like, we really found a resource, I felt like, at school. It was only, like, I think until, like, I got older, maybe, like, when I started hitting, like, middle school, that I noticed, like, our economic difference, and just, like, that we had to be constantly moving in Salem, in the Northeast area, because we couldn't afford rent sometimes. And so we were, like, evicted, or, you know, like, asked to leave because we were able to, like, make ends meet and things like that. And so it was really difficult, like, trying to transition. And so, like, going through school, it never felt like I belonged to one place. It was always like we were always constantly moving, and it was difficult to establish friendships and, you know, feel like I could, like, I don't know, like, work on myself and, like, truly,
just, like, flourish.
Yeah, like, experience, like, a normal childhood. It just always felt like I was, like, just, like, to take it into a place where I could, you know, feel comfortable, and then immediately I would have to be moved somewhere else. And that was hard. Thankfully, like, me and my siblings have always had a really good, strong connection with each other, and so I've had that support system, like, with them. But I think, like, it was only until, like, middle school, I think, when I wanted to play sports, that my mom was like, no, we can't, because she was afraid of, like, injuries and things like that. And sometimes when we would get really sick, she'd always be, like, fearful of, like, oh, like, how are we going to pay for medication? Because back then, not knowing that we had no form of health insurance at all. And so, like, those were, like, separate things that I felt like excluded me from the rest of the kids. That wasn't able to have that normal childhood, I guess, that stable, loving environment. It was just, like, the constant, like, transition between, like, houses, and just, like, the exclusion of not being able to participate in normal programs, and just, like, having to go to, like, after school things just to provide, you know, just to get that extra meal, like, after school activities, they would have those. And I mean, I never felt like I was the odd kid out. Like, I was able to, like, make friends, but it was still very hard. Like, it was never, like, a stable, like, good environment for me, I felt. Yeah.
I don't think I felt, I don't think going into school made me feel different, or, like, that situation that we had just gone through with moving over here was affected by it, mostly because I got here right before kindergartner, so I started kindergarten in, like, right the year after, I think. And luckily, I started at Auburn, in Salem, right, like, immediately. And luckily, we had bilingual classes where they were able to teach me Spanish and English and just have like that translation. And I think that went on for a couple of years until like once I already knew how to like fully speak English and communicate. So I think language never was a barrier. Maybe at first, like a little. But I don't think it kept me like apart from making friends or anything like that. And I feel like our school is kind of, a lot of kids were of color, so it never felt like I was just like white with white kids. But yeah, I don't think it, I think just personally I was just outcasted, but that was just me. And maybe it had to do with like the fact that I just was new to everything. But I still like haven't really understood that. But yeah, like my parents were very supportive, especially with school. I think like my mom's goal of like moving here and starting like to better ourselves and stuff started with her like really focusing like her time with me at school. Like she would go to school programs and like she would meet the teachers and like they were also very supportive. I think the school helped a lot too, in having those teachers, and like we had a lot of Latinx teachers, so they really helped in that sense. And like she would just help a lot with school, which was good because that made me feel good that they were involved and that I wasn't just like thrown in there to not like have support. But yeah, I think besides that, I think everything was pretty.
So growing up for you, were there ever any specific moments or certain situations where you kind of had that, not the realization that you were undocumented, but a sense that something was off, like with Fatima sharing that like she couldn't go into certain sporting programs, or like she had to be very careful about not getting hurt physically? Like, was that ever something that you also like had in the back of your mind?
Yeah, I think it wasn't very like obvious till middle school or like beyond that, when kids would talk about like going on vacations and like going to other states and visiting like their families, and like I literally never left the state till I was probably in high school, and that was just to Washington. And then after that, I like the only other state that I ever left to was like 2 years ago when I went to Vegas to visit a friend. But like my parents were just so afraid to ever like leave or even go to like a different city. Like we wouldn't even come to Portland just because of that fear. And I think once I started to like hear other kids and like them talking about how during summer they would like go to all these places, and like I never did that. Like my summers would just be like me at a babysitter's house literally all day until my parents got out from working in the fields. So like I think it started to hit me when I started to hear those kids' experiences and like realizing that my life at home was actually not what like everyone's life was. So I think that's when it affected me, mostly with like traveling and like just going out as a family. Like my parents were good parents, but I don't think I had that like fun childhood, or like the things I do with my little brother now were like not at all what I did, with my parents. So, and then being an only child didn't help because I was just alone, and like I didn't really have anyone to talk to at home. So yeah.
I think going off of like just I couldn't play sports, and my mom was always just concerned about our health and things like that. I think for me, just like not having my mom at home because she also had to work so much. She missed birthdays. She missed like Christmas. I felt like she missed so much of our lives, and they were just so focused on trying to make a living that they just would kind of forget, or that the important thing was that they were supposed to be there. And we had each other, I had them, and we would try to make the best of it, but it was still very hard because you would see all these other families, like when we would go to the park, like it would be like the four of us, you know, and like you would see all the other parents with their kids, and it felt like you were missing something, and you didn't have like that supportive like family structure that you needed. And so me and my siblings were just kind of like always on our own. Like we were responsible of feeding ourselves, of clothing ourselves, and even after like my mom kind of tried to be a little bit more at home after she had my youngest sister, she immediately had to go back. I think she only took like 5 weeks after she gave birth, and then like immediately she went back to working. And so my little sister like was just, you know, left for our care, and like we kind of took on that responsibility. So in a way, we always raised ourselves, and my parents, like, they're very hardworking, and like they showed that determination, you know, like we tenemos que salir adelante, and like that perseverance. Like I always will thank them for that. But it was just also like I feel like they missed so much. And I sometimes I have like that like I have something against that, like you should have been there more, you should have gone to our birthdays, you should have been there to be with us. But it wasn't their fault, like they didn't have a choice. Like it was first, we have to make sure that you have a roof over your head, we have to make sure that there's food on the table, that we have to make sure that we can keep the lights on. And so it was that survival constantly that like affected our family structure.
Yeah, I think Fatima brings a good point that if you, like, what others don't understand coming from like immigrant homes is that because of the circumstances that our parents are in, and like trying to literally like live day by day and bring food to the table every day, we're like the children or our childhoods, I feel like in a way we were robbed from living those experiences, like having a childhood and going to the park and going out with our families and not worrying about like raids and like all these things that, you know, you would hear about. And I think in a way I think that affected our childhood more than any other child that I think wouldn't have to deal with those circumstances, which sucks, because then that like in a way messes with our family structure, because we in a way we're mad at our parents that like, why are you gone so much? Like we don't do this, my friends like go out, they go on vacation, like why don't we? Stuff like that. So, and I think that goes on with us even up to, at least with me personally, that has gone up to like to now where I'm an adult and I'm like, why didn't you do this? Like I have those conversations now. And the good thing is that now I understand, like now I'm like, okay, I now understand that you were just trying to feed me, and like you weren't there just because you didn't want to be. But yeah, I think that's something that it's not very talked about, that our childhood somehow was affected a lot by that.
When did you first begin identifying as undocumented and specifically using that word? Like, when did you realize, like, this is something I am, like, I am undocumented?
For me, it was during high school, senior year, when I was applying for scholarships in college applications. That's when I first discovered what my status as an immigrant in this country meant. Like, I didn't have the necessary paperwork to qualify for these opportunities. I was an undocumented immigrant living in Oregon. It was mind-blowing to me, because this is everything I had known. I grew up in Oregon. I had gone through the educational system. I was about to graduate from high school, and it was like, no, you're not a part of this society. You know, you don't belong here. You're not supposed to be here. And once I remember just like reading the descriptions of like scholarship things, it's like, oh, in order to qualify, you have to be a U.S. citizen, and I couldn't check that box, or you would have to put like non-alien resident or something like that. And well, what is it called? When you have to check it, I don't remember what it's called.
It's like, I don't remember actually.
I can't remember what it is.
That sounds right. Okay.
Yeah.
Maybe they use the word non-authorized.
Not authorized.
I know they use like
Non-resident or alien, yeah. But it was on there, and I think that's when I was first trying to like wrap my mind around what that meant for me personally, that being undocumented. And I remember having these conversations with my mom. It's like, Mom, like I can't apply for this. Like I want to go to college. It's like I need the money and I need to be able to apply for this, but I can't. And I just kind of was just trying to like figure out like what am I gonna do, how am I gonna get there. And then like I remember like telling her like, why didn't you wait to cross over and then have me here? Like I could have been a citizen, and like look at all these like things that I'm having to go through now. Like I was just like really like upset. I was just like, this is so unfair. Like I worked my butt off like to get the GPA that I have now. I'm taking all these classes. Like I've applied myself. Like look at all the volunteer work that I've done. Like I was just like, I was reading over my resume. I was like, I'm overqualified for this scholarship. Like I deserve it. But it was no, because you are undocumented. You can't get this. You don't meet the requirements. And it was just like it affected me at that point. Like I was just like, okay, you're telling me no, but I'm gonna like figure out a way to like find a solution to this problem. Like I'm not gonna let this stop me. Like I made it a goal. Like end of my senior year, like I was like, I'm going to college. Like I don't care how long it's gonna take me. And I remember like every morning going to see my high school counselor at McKay. I would go to inside Mr. Brooks' office, like, I need another scholarship to apply to. Like, give me another scholarship. And I applied over, like, what, I want to say, like, 30, close to 50 scholarships. Like, I got so many rejection letters, and, like, only 5 said yes. And those were the scholarships that I did qualify, that I didn't have to have that, you know, U.S. citizen requirement. And so I think that's when I was, like, first getting familiar with that, identifying myself as, because it was the first time that I was trying to voice out to my high school counselors, like, hey, like, this is my situation, like, I'm undocumented, I need your help. And so that was the first time that I was kind of advocating for myself, and reaching out to the resources that were around me.
I would say I identified, or I knew what my status was, like, from a young age, just because for a while, like, my parents, like when you are undocumented, like, your parents have to tell you, they have to have, like, that conversation with you, and, like, telling you that, okay, like, this is who you are, just so you know, like, if someone asks, don't tell them, don't ever talk about, you know, like, where we come from, or that you don't have papers, just, like, for safety issues. I think it's, like, the safety talk kind of in a way. And that's, like, what my parents would do with me. And I don't think they ever went in detail, but as a young kid, but they would explain that, like, we didn't have the privilege that others might have, and that even though this was our home, like, we still had to be careful in, like, certain areas and certain things we did, or, like, not get in trouble, not get in fights. Like, it was mostly, like, be careful, don't express your status or whatever we identify as with others, because it could be dangerous. So I think at a young age, like, I knew that, and I remember for a while, like, when I was young, a lot of, like, talk of raids would be going on, or, like, that they would be at Walmart, or that, like, ICE agents would go to stores, or, like, restaurants, and that's more when it would come up, when my parents would be like, okay, like, we can't go here because it could be dangerous, and I would kind of question that and be like, why? Like I guess it made me realize that because of my status, like, I couldn't go into certain locations or be careful in certain ways, or even, like, driving when laws started to change, and that with, like, the license thing, that my parents would be like, oh, like, you can't get your license, or you can't do this and that, stuff like that. But yeah, I don't think it affected me, or I knew my status, but I didn't know how it affected me till high school, when I started to apply, and just being said no to was.
Did your parents ever have that, like, similar safety talk with you, like, telling you, like, don't tell anyone that you don't have papers? Like, do you remember anything about that?
I think yes, like, in elementary school, like, once we had, like, settled down, and we were going to school, and when during I think it was, like, fourth or fifth grade, I want to say fourth for sure, my dad, he was deported, and I think that's, like, when I finally came into, like, realization, like, the whole deportation, like, we had talked about, like, you know, this is a possibility. Like, we're not, like, as a family, we have to be careful. But it wasn't real until my dad was deported, and the police officer was in the house, and they arrested him. He was detained. And after that, like, because before, like, my mom had always just been like, si te preguntan en la escuela, like, si they ask where you were born, tú les dices que en California.
Yeah.
And so she would tell me that, and I wouldn't, like, when we were, like, kids, like, I mean, with, like, when you're little, like, you really don't talk about that. But when people would ask me, like, oh yeah, I was like, I'm from California.
Did that ever make you feel weird, like?
And then I had to lie.
Yeah.
Yeah. I was like hiding my identity. Like, I wasn't allowed to truly express who I was. And so until my dad was deported, I think after that my mom got really strict on, like, who we were bringing to the house, who we were talking to. She'd be like, de la casa los quiero, like, de la escuela a la casa, like, you can't go anywhere else, because she was just so afraid. And then I remember, like, when I was, like, in 4th grade, after my dad was deported, my mom struggled a lot. Like, economically, she had to be on her own. And so my mom, like, she would go home, and then, like, after work, like, she would have to go to another job, and, like, she would clean houses or, like, do something else to bring a little income. So she was never home. But, like, me and my siblings, like, we would go out to the neighborhood and, like, start washing cars, or, like, we would bake cookies and sell them, and, like, trying to make that little extra money. And I remember, like, when, like, this is, like, when I was, like, this was an experience that I had when I was walking down the sidewalk, and I had my little bucket, and I had just finished, like, washing someone's car, and I had earned, like, $10, and I was like, I was so fucking excited. I was like, yes, like, I'm gonna go home. And then, like, I remember the kid whose parents' car I washed, he was driving, and he was older. I think he was, like, in high school, and he was white. And then he's like, I like, was tying my shoe. I was, like, on the sidewalk, and then I stopped, and, like, he stopped when he saw me stop, and then he, like, yelled out, and he's like, you wetback. And I was like, oh my God, like, I was just like my face, like, I couldn't pick it up. I couldn't pick up my head because I was so ashamed. And it's like, oh my God, he knows. Like, he knows. And it was just like, my immediate fear was just like, oh my God, like, get home. And I waited until he left, you know, because I was afraid that, like, maybe he was gonna, because I was just walking by myself, and I was like 8 or 9, you know, and my house wasn't too far, but I was like, that was like the first moment of fear that I felt because of my identity. And, you know, so, like, my mom, like, she really tried to just, like, keep us, like, really safe, and, like, the relationships that we formed, like, she was always, like, careful to, like, not say anything too much, or, like, make sure that, like, we were, like, always, you know, in a safe environment, and not talking to, like, strangers about it, or things like that.
I think some instances that, like, now that I think about it, were also, besides, like, the high school thing, and, like, besides being in that situation where you have to, like, know that how it affects you, I think, like, growing up, I realized that it also affected, like, different aspects of my parents' and I's life. Like, we'd apply to apartments. Like, for a while, we looked for, like, almost a year for a new place to live, just because, like, some places asked for, like, a social security, and, like, my parents didn't have it, and, like, that would keep us from living in, like, these nicer neighborhoods, or, like, nicer apartments, even though they weren't, like, that super nice, or, like, white rich, but, like, they were nicer than most of, like, Northeast Salem would be. And, like, that would always be something, like, little things like that too are what, when you're a kid and your parents are undocumented, and even if you're documented or not, like, that affects you. It affects, like, if you can get a car, or if you have to settle for, like, a used car just because you can't buy one because of your documentation. Like, so many little, like, things that people with privilege don't think, like, it affects us do, like, even buying a car, or even, like, going
where
somewhere.
you go shop, where you get groceries. So along with all of these experiences of kind of being faced with, like, your identity, I know you brought up, like, when you were tying your shoe and someone, like, just very outwardly, like, racistly yelled that to you. Did you have any other, maybe, like, less direct instances where you felt that shame or that guilt of being undocumented? Like, was that something that was a repetitive feeling for you, or, like, do you have any, like, instances where you were like, wow, like, I'm, like, feeling this right now?
Personally, I felt that a lot when, like, again, in high school when, like, applying to colleges came up and, like, trying to, like, apply to all these scholarships and stuff like that, and, like, constantly being said no to by counselors, or, like, them immediately giving me that, like, option B of, like, community college. I think it just brought up feelings that made me mad to be undocumented, and, like, in a way I hated myself for it, and I also, like, hated the fact that, like, that happened to me and my parents, to put us in that situation. Like, I remember just, like, I don't think I ever felt, like, mad at my parents for doing what they did until that point. But even though, like, I understood that it was for the better, like, it still, like, low-key made you feel mad and, like, angered at yourself and just, like, at everyone, because you were, like, again, like Fatima said, like, I also had, like, all these things that I did. I, like, worked my ass off all of high school to, like, get to where I was, to, like, go to a good college, and, like, that was, like, always my goal, right? And then, like, finally, like, working so hard to be let down, like, when you're about to do it and when you want to take that step, like, that's just the worst, because it's, like, that's not fair.
And you get so angry, and you start looking at the system, and you see how broken it is, and you see how unfair and how it treats these people, and how, like, it excludes you, and, like, it limits you, it puts you in a box, and, like, this is where you belong, and you're not allowed to go anywhere beyond that. And it makes you feel so, like hopeless, and, like, what's the purpose? Like, I remember, like, we having these conversations with my mom, like, constantly, me having to fight her and be like, no, like, I deserve to do more, you deserve to be more. Like, it took me a while, because I think for a while I was just, like, very angry. I was very angry, not only at them, but the whole system itself, and very angry at myself and the way that things were playing out for me, because I had been working in a restaurant with my mom for, like, over 3 years. Started working there since I was 15, and I saw how hard she worked every day to make sure that we had, like, just a little bit, you know. And I was just like, and I saw the way that we were treated. I saw the way that she was you know, pretty much taken advantage of. Like, she wasn't paid enough what she was making, and just like the whole, like, working condition that she was having to experience. But then, like, just like how she wasn't given the rights that she deserved as a human being. Like, I just saw that. I saw all the, like, unjust treatment that she was facing, and then I took a look at myself at that moment, and I was like, that's not what I want for myself. And it's sad to think that, like, my parents had sacrificed everything to give me something better, to give my siblings and I something better. And it was just, like, I had to fight her, too, because I had felt like she had allowed the system to beat her down. Because she was like, no, like, settle for this. Like, go to community college, go here, and then you can get a nice job, like, at a store, and you'll make that money that you need. Because that's what her mentality was, you know, like, just the bare minimum, you have to settle for that. And I was like, no, Mom, like, we don't have to. And I was just so angry at her because she kept pushing me down, because, like, you're being, she's like, eres una soñadora. She's like, te gusta soñar mucho, like, tienes que poner tus pies sobre la tierra, like, you need to start being more realistic and stuff, like, you need to stop dreaming, you need to stop. And, like, it was so sad because it was coming from my own mom. And then, like, the whole system was telling me, no, you need to stop dreaming, like, no, you need to stop, because I was told, no, you can't go to college, and, like, that's what you wanted to do, you know. And so you're constantly told, and, like, in the system, that you can't do certain things because of this, and you're told you have to be a certain way, and you have to live a certain lifestyle. And it's just not fair, and you start feeling, like, that hate inside you, and you start radiating that towards even your own, like, parents and yourself as well. It starts eating you.
So with those feelings that, like, you know, you said they, like, started to eat you, like, I know that you found a lot of resiliency and, like, hope despite that, but what other ways did you really, like, cope with those feelings? Like, what allowed you to stay motivated? Like, what was it that, like, just allowed you to, like, process all of these, like, feelings that you were, like, feeling all the time?
It was just that, I feel like, determination, like, that individual determination that I was gonna prove them that besides, like, all these barriers and all these challenges I'm having to overcome, like, I'm going to prove to you that I can and that I will.
Yeah.
And like, I was like, Mom, I will show you that I can get enough money to pay for college, and you don't have to worry about me.
Yeah.
Like, it was just like my own determination and just trying to advocate for my own self and what I wanted. And I kept like envisioning what that was going to mean, not only for me, but also for her. Like, because up to this point, she has sacrificed her whole life. You know, she had a really good job in Mexico. She was a secretary. She was working for the city. She had a stable income. She was making way more than my dad. And now she was, you know, at a waitress at a Mexican restaurant, getting minimum wage and being treated unfairly. And I told her, no, Mom, like, one day I'm going to give you something better. And so just like envisioning that for them, like, that everything that they had left behind, all the sacrifices, like, it was going to be for something worth it, you know, like, I'm gonna be able to provide you something with better, but also just to prove to everyone, I think also to myself, that like I was capable of, you know, of accomplishing something, and that you weren't gonna tell me no, like I was gonna show you otherwise. So yeah.
Personally, I think my, like, that anger and that hate that I built up towards the system is what motivated me and gave me that determination to fight back for it, or to fight against it. Because just like when that like whole thing of high school happened, and just like at the same time, like so many laws were changing that like affected my parents, and just seeing how much like they struggled and just how much they were being affected by it, I think that like that really built me to where I was like, no, like, fuck this, like, I'm gonna fight back for it. Like, I can't just kind of like Fatima said, like, I'm not gonna let them be pushed and be treated like that by the system. I think that was the biggest determination for me, that it's like, no, I'm not gonna let it just stop there, and I'm not gonna let it tear me or my family down.
With kind of realizing, like, okay, like, I'm undocumented, like, this is a part of who I am, this is a part of my identity, what was your, like, coming out as undocumented experience like, if you have had one?
Mine was when I started school here, which is really great. I don't think I ever, like, even though I knew who I was in that identity in high school, I never felt like I needed to talk about it with anyone. And I don't think I ever felt like oppressed to talk about it with anyone. I just didn't find myself there. I didn't think it needed to be told there. And then once I started like school here and found like more people that advocated for that, and more people that kind of understood me, like even being at the cultural centers and like meeting all these different people that are like, that you don't just have like dumb conversations to you about like boys and whatever, you know, like you have legit like adult and like human right conversations where people like are understanding, and like they're not just pointless conversations anymore. Like people are actually like listening to you, and like you're actually like able to communicate to people the way you want to communicate and the way you want to identify as. And I think like having that support here and just like meeting different people that you feel welcomed in, like really motivated me to talk more and like literally say, oh, I'm undocumented. Like I don't think I ever said that to anyone until like I started finding a community here. So
for me was, I want to say, through my internship with CAUSA, I had the opportunity to like interact with the community. As a community engagement intern, I was like organizing all the volunteers, and I was doing like voter registration and phone banking, things like that. And with the staff at CAUSA, especially with our field director, Cristina, she kind of like taught me a little bit of like what the importance of sharing your story is, and how if you really wanted to create real change, like it was gonna have to start from the bottom and work itself up. And we had like all these conversations, like especially during lunch, like just like, so she's like, tell me about your family, and it was just like this space where I felt like I no longer had to hide it, because I knew she understood, and she was kind of like, my family is in the same situation, even though she herself didn't identify as undocumented. It was just like finally a space where I felt like I belonged, and I wasn't being judged, and I didn't have to prove to myself, didn't have to prove it to anyone, like I didn't have to prove myself to anyone. And so it felt really welcoming. And through my internship, like I began to kind of find my voice, And it was until like the January 14th immigrant rally where I was asked to like speak about DACA, and it was soon after, like, you know, the Trump administration was put into office, and what was that going to mean for the rest of the future. And like that's where I felt my identity as undocumented, specifically DACA and a dreamer, I think that's when I finally like took complete ownership of it. And it was like the platform that I was given, and I was like, this is who I am, and this is okay, and you have to be able to be empowered by it. Don't let it bring you down. And I think it was finally when I was able to realize that like my significance and the change that I was gonna be able to make in my community. And it, so through CALSA, through my internship, that's where I was like, this is who I am, and that's amazing. This is who you are. So
I think somehow it feels like you start like taking ownership of it and letting it empower you when you start being challenged by it.
Mm-hmm.
So like I don't think if I would have been challenged by it in high school, or even like here sometimes with like scholarships and like healthcare, or like now like with DACA, like if you're not challenged by the system, I think, or until you are, I think is when you really start like realizing like, oh shit, like this is who I am, like why am I not using this, why am I not like speaking up about it. And then once that happens, like you start taking ownership of it and be like, no, I am undocumented, I am a DACista, like I'm gonna use it to my advantage instead of letting the system break me down for it.
Kind of switching gears a little bit, I'm going to ask a few questions about mental health. So we'll go ahead and start with growing up, did you have any understanding of mental health? I know that growing up, physical health is very much like promoted, like with your mom like saying like be careful, like don't get hurt, but was there ever any outlet that kind of like gave you an understanding of mental health?
I think I started to really understand mental health and mental wellness and like the resources that there were in maybe like in middle school. I don't think it ever became to where like my identity affected it until like later, but I think in middle school I did have for some reason I had a lot of anxiety and a lot of stress. Like I have like chronic stress, and I think, or that led me to my parents taking me to counseling, which happened like late middle school, early high school. And then I think even though it wasn't like that big of a deal, like I still went to it. I like understood what it was, and I understood like I think I went for it not because it was something like big that was happening, but I think it was just my stress of like growing up, that like the typical teenage like mental health stuff that like you hear about. And so I went to counseling, and I started to understand like that there were what like mental illnesses were and how to get help, and counseling helped. But then so that happened, but I don't think that like it affected like mental health for my identity until later. And even like up to a couple of years, like a year or two ago, that it started like with the whole like what does it mean to be undocumented and all this stuff affected by that. So that's how I understood it. So even though I had understanding of it, like it didn't affect me in a larger way till later.
I think for me, I saw like my brother and my other siblings kind of deal with a little bit of depression. A lot of it had to do, well, one, because my brother, he went through a stage where he was very ashamed of his sexuality. He tried to like express at a very young age that, hey, like I'm gay, but his identity was always like, you know, completely like shattered and like shut down by my parents, because just like in the Latino culture that we were raised, and Catholicism and religion being a great influence over it, he always like struggled to feel comfortable, and I witnessed himself like commit like physical like self-harm because of that. And then my sister as well, she struggled with that when she was trying to like come to terms with her own sexual identity. And so I witnessed it from like from the sidelines. It never really affected me personally until I think it was like later after like high school that I started to like understand a little bit and be a little bit more exposed to it. But I did have an understanding of it. Not like a complete understanding, because I think for like at least from in my family, when there's a problem such as like my brother's like homosexuality, like it's just always like hush hush, don't talk about it. You see that he's going through depression, you see that he's committing self-harm, but our parents were not going to talk to us about that because no one could know, like that's just like not good, and we can't tell anyone he's doing this. So it's just like it was never a conversation that was discussed. And I think in school, like we had we had health class, but mental health was never really addressed or emphasized like the importance of it, and really understanding what it meant for people and how you could support and what it actually meant. It was never something that we talked about. So I had like no like actual like structural like information. I had nothing about it. Like there was never any like talks or discussions about it, which limited the knowledge, I think.
So when did you two finally like really come to that like comprehensive understanding of what mental health was?
To be honest, not up until this past year, because I think it's when it affected me the most. And I think I don't like to just blame it on like everything that's been going on with like the pressure that we have as like a first gen, as undocumented, and then color. I don't like fully want to put it on that, but I think like it does affect that. So I personally have like this past year I was diagnosed with depression. And I've always had stress and I've always had anxiety, but I like this year it really like I understood how much it had actually been affecting me since I started college. Because I don't know, like I don't really understand how it would have affected me since then, but I think deep down there has always been pressure on my shoulders that I feel from not just my family but just like society, like the system. And now it's getting more intense because as I'm here like hearing about like all these people that are doing great things, and like I want to do as much as like other people and like to help the community, but like I also don't know, like I also sometimes don't want to put myself like, oh, everything I do has to revolve around like me doing something for the community. Like I can also like help myself and do what I like. So I think like